Some lost websites feel like digital crime scenes without a crime. A silent homepage, a missing guest book, and a whole neighborhood that used to be alive. Before social media became the front door of the internet, millions of people built tiny personal worlds on GeoCities. It was not one community, exactly, it was a city metaphor. Pages lived in themed neighborhoods with names that sounded like places you could visit, areas for music fans, hobbyists, science fiction readers, family pages, fan shrines, and experiments made by people learning HTML, one glowing cursor at a time. What people remember is not just the design, it is the feeling, tiled backgrounds, auto-playing, MIDI files, under-construction signs, guest books, web rings, animated flames, pages that explained without irony who someone was and what they loved. What we know is fairly simple. GeoCities became one of the defining personal web platforms of the 1990s. Yahoo acquired it near the end of that decade. Years later, the main United States service was shut down, and an enormous amount of user-made web culture disappeared from the live internet. That is where the mystery feeling begins. Not because there is a hidden scandal, because the disappearance was ordinary, corporate, and still strangely haunting. A place built out of personal expression was treated like obsolete infrastructure. What remains unclear is exactly how much was lost forever. Some pages were archived, some were mirrored, some survived in forgotten backups, old bookmarks or fragments quoted elsewhere. But the full shape of GeoCities as people experienced it in real time can never be perfectly reconstructed. And that is why it matters. GeoCities was messy amateur and deeply human. It captured an internet before profiles became standardized and feeds became endless. The first vanished website in this story is not a single page. It is a city that went dark, leaving its streets scattered through public archives and memory. The strange thing about GeoCities is that it did not vanish cleanly. It left fingerprints everywhere. When Yahoo prepared to close the main service, many users understood that their old pages might simply disappear. Some saved their own work, many did not. And because the site had been built by millions of ordinary people over many years, there was no single neat library copy waiting on a shelf. What survived came from public traces. Web archives held snapshots of many pages. Preservation groups and volunteers worked to capture what they could before the shutdown. Old search results, blog links, forum references, and web rings pointed toward addresses that no longer behaved like living streets. But an archived website is not the same as a living one. That is the part people sometimes miss. A saved page may keep the text, but lose the background. It may preserve a homepage, but not the guest book. It may show a broken image icon, where someone once placed a photo, a banner, or a tiny animated spaceship. Links can lead to dead ends. Music can be missing. Counters can freeze in time. What we know is that major parts of GeoCities were preserved in public collections, and those fragments are invaluable. What remains unclear is the emotional map, which pages were visited every day, which communities felt active, which tiny fan site mattered deeply to a handful of people, then disappeared without leaving enough context behind. That is why exploring the archive feels eerie. You are not discovering a secret. You are moving through a reconstruction. It is history with missing walls. The simpler explanation for most gaps is not mystery in the dramatic sense. It is scale-age changing technology and the fragility of free hosting. GeoCities survived as fragments because fragments were all the internet knew how to save. And the next question is harder if this much survived. What did the web lose without anyone noticing? The lasting mystery of GeoCities is not who turned out the lights. It is why the room felt so empty afterward. By the time the main service closed, The web had already changed. Personal pages were being replaced by profiles. Profiles were being pulled into feeds. Instead of building a strange little homepage from scratch, people were choosing templates, status boxes, photo albums, and platforms that promised everything would be easier. In many ways, that was true. The newer internet was cleaner. It was faster to join. It was easier to find friends, share updates, and avoid the chaos of broken layouts and blinking text. But something quiet was traded away. On GeoCities, a page could be ugly in a very specific way. It could reveal taste, effort, confusion, obsession, and personality before algorithms learned how to flatten those signals into familiar shapes. What we know is that GeoCities became a symbol of the early personal web. Its shutdown turned a normal product decision into a preservation lesson. People began to ask whether digital culture deserved the same care as books, recordings, photographs, or letters. What remains unclear is how to preserve the feeling of a place that was never designed to last. A snapshot can save code. It can save text. Sometimes it can save images. But can it save the experience of clicking through a web ring at midnight, finding a fan page made by a stranger, and realizing the internet was full of hand-built rooms? There is no need to invent a darker explanation. The loss came from ordinary forces, companies closing services, users moving on files, decaying standards changing, and history being noticed too late. That may be the real digital mystery. Not that GeoCities disappeared, but that so much of the early web was treated as disposable while people were still living inside it. And somewhere in the archive, a frozen homepage still waits like a porch light on an abandoned street.